The 39 Apartments of Ludwig van Beethoven by Jonah Winter, illustrated by Barry Blitt. Fact: Ludwig van Beethoven was born in the town of Bonn, in the country of Germany, in the year 1770. Years later, he became a great composer. A composer is someone who writes music. Fact: Ludwig van Beethoven owned 5 legless pianos and composed great works on the floor. Fact: Ludwig van Beethoven lived in 39 different apartments, which is, of course, the subject of our story. See book title. But now things get fuzzier. Did our hero really pour water on top of his head while composing? Why did he live in so many different apartments? And what were those apartments like? As far as we can tell, Beethoven's first apartment was a beautiful parlor in the center of Vienna, which is the capital of Austria. Here, it seems, he composed the Moonlight Sonata and his first symphony. A sonata is a music piece for the piano. A symphony is a piece for an entire orchestra. But Ludwig forgot to pay the rent. So he was kicked out. This was a problem because, fact, it is very difficult to move a piano. Fact, it is even more difficult to move 5 pianos. After 2 centuries of research, we still have no clues as to how all the pianos made it from one apartment to the next. Nor can we be certain that the following sentence is true. But here it is. Ludwig van Beethoven's next home was a basement apartment in a dangerous part of town. Here he composed Piano Sonatas 3 through 17, his violin concerto in D major, and the Second Symphony. A concerto is a piece for a full orchestra and it has one solo instrument. Why did Ludwig move after only 8.5 days? Was it, as his diary suggests, because of the hideous stinky cheese smell that filled his apartment? We do not know. Nor do we truly know how the pianos made it out of the building. But scuff marks discovered in the hallway can mean only one thing. The pianos must have been slid through the back door, then drawn up to the roof by a system of pulleys and lowered onto a second-floor balcony at the front of the building, where the neighbors must have been kind enough to allow the movers to wheel the pianos through their apartment to the stairway, down the stairs, and out the front door. It is unclear how the pianos made it into Ludwig van Beethoven's next apartment, which was like a palace, full of light and air. From the terrace, he had a view of the Danube River, and it is likely that the smell of Viennese coffee wafted in through his open windows. Here he composed symphonies 3 through 5, piano sonatas 18 through 23, and many chamber works for clarinet, bassoon, oboe, flute, and English horn, in addition to several string trios. It was indeed a busy time. But Ludwig van Beethoven was going deaf, and he had to bang quite loudly on the 5 pianos to hear anything. Much research has revealed that there were complaints from the neighbors about the noise. Bits of paper with the German words for shut up have been discovered, and then there are the dents in the ceiling of his downstairs neighbor, probably made by a broomstick banged repeatedly. Poor Ludwig was again kicked out. By now, the movers were certainly getting fed up. In the diary of one Anselm Swartz, we find the following translated here into modern English. After this move, I'm out of here. That dude is whacked in the head. Yow! My back is like really messed up. The records do show that this job was a humdinger. The easy part was moving the pianos out. They were simply lowered from the balcony, and all went smoothly. The hard part was moving the pianos into the new apartment, which was tiny and in an attic. It seems the movers had to push the pianos through the old castle next door, through a grand hall displaying suits of armor, up 3 flights of stairs, and into a dentist office. The movers then bashed in the wall, a theory supported by the gaping hole we have found behind a poster with the German words for "Don't forget to floss" that must have been hung to conceal the spot. They passed through the dentist apartment, out into the hallway, and up onto Ludwig van Beethoven's new roof, where they could be lowered carefully, then hoisted into his tiny attic apartment, which, luckily, had an enormous window. Here, Beethoven wrote all of his piano concerti, as well as his famous Pastoral Symphony No. 6. It was gorgeous music, but repeated complaints were filed with the local magistrate, mostly by one neighbor, a certain Fräulein in Hausfrau. In one complaint, she demands the maestro's immediate arrest because that madman is banging on those blasted pianos day and night. And yet, it appears that Ludwig could hardly hear his pianos at all. After much growling and pouring of water over his head, he quite likely decided that there must be something wrong with this apartment. It was time to move once again. Probably because it had been so much work getting the pianos into this apartment, Ludwig van Beethoven decided to leave them. He needed some new pianos anyway, since the old ones weren't loud enough anymore. Or so he thought. By now, Beethoven's hearing had gotten so bad that when he played his new pianos in his stylish new loft-style apartment, he played bangingly loud. This notion is supported by a startling discovery made in his neighbor's apartments. Hundreds of cotton balls with traces of dried earwax. Clearly, the noise was unbearable. And the neighbors must have been furious. Scraps of an old eviction notice show that Ludwig van Beethoven was booted after only 1 day. It should be noted, however, that during that 1 day he composed 10 violin sonatas, 2 more symphonies, and 1 more string quartet. It seems to have been a good place to work. Not surprisingly, the great composer was somewhat upset at being kicked out. "Don't these fools know who I am?" he scrawled on the bathroom wall. Stains reveal that he then dumped another bowl of water on his head. Certainly the movers had lost all patience with schlepping Ludwig's many pianos up and down stairways. A diagram has been found, clearly drawn by mover Schwartz, and revealing a new plan in which the pianos would never have to touch the ground. A large slide would be constructed, much like the cement truck's enormous funnel. The movers must have studied the bold plan carefully before attempting it. The slide would stick out the window and extend all the way to a chimney several blocks away. The pianos would slide out the window toward the chimney where a catapult would shoot them up into the air. The pianos would then fall straight through a hole in the ceiling of Ludwig von Beethoven's new apartment, where a gigantic piano sized pillow would cushion their fall. But, according to various eyewitness accounts and newspaper articles from that day, the entire device blew away in a storm. Fact. That's all we know of the 39 apartments of Ludwig von Beethoven. The end. This book was about a real composer. Ludwig von Beethoven did exist. Some of it was made up. There's an author's note here at the end that helps you know what the facts are we actually know and some of the things that they made up. Ludwig von Beethoven was, in fact, a great composer who lived from 1770 to 1827. As an adult, he did, in fact, live in the great musical city of Vienna in the great musical country of Austria. It is also true that he lived in no fewer than 39 apartments during his adult life and around Vienna. And he owned several legless pianos. However, very little is known about the apartments themselves, or about Beethoven's difficulties in moving his many pianos in and out of them. Therefore, this story picks up where history leaves off. Why did Beethoven change apartments so often? How did he move his pianos in and out of the various buildings he lived in? Were there frequent complaints from the neighbors? There is evidence that neighbors' complaints would have been warranted. According to the accounts of people who visited Beethoven in his apartments, he made quite a racket while composing his masterworks. He howled, growled, and repeatedly poured water on his own head. As his deafness got worse, for he did in fact go deaf, his playing got louder. During the last several years of his life, when he was completely deaf, he banged on the piano keys with the fury of a madman. Eyewitness accounts tell us that Beethoven did in fact lose his mind. It's no wonder. How must it feel to be one of the greatest composers of all time, and then to go deaf? That Beethoven composed his greatest work, the Ninth Symphony, after he had completely lost his hearing, is nothing short of miraculous. That he managed to compose so much beautiful music while constantly moving his pianos in and out of different apartments may be short of miraculous, but it is something to think about. The end papers of this book, which I'll turn to in a second, are details from a facsimile of a recently rediscovered piano composition that had been missing since 1890. The Gross Fugue, written in Beethoven's own hand. It is unclear just where Beethoven composed this work, or how many neighbors were disturbed in the process. And what was this work doing at the bottom of a library drawer in Pennsylvania for more than 100 years? This, too, is unclear. So that piece of music was actually way back at the beginning here, so I'm going to zoom back so you can see. Here it is. This is Beethoven's own handwriting, a little bit of that piano fugue. And if you are interested in listening to some of Beethoven's work, that Ninth Symphony that he composed when he was completely deaf, part of it is Ode to Joy, which many of you sang last year, the tune to Ode to Peace, at fifth grade graduation. And even if you didn't, I bet a lot of you know the words. If you are watching this on YouTube, there is a link to the recording of the Ninth Symphony in the description. And if you want to hear the part that you know, the Ode to Joy or Ode to Peace part, you want to start at 1 hour and 4 minutes, and you'll hear the tune first in the instruments and later in the voices, both the soloist and the choir. If you're watching this on Google Classroom, there is a link right with this book on the Google Classroom. And again, you'll want to start at 1 hour and 4 minutes. I hope you enjoyed this book. Bye.